Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Abreu and I'm Community and Program Manager at Singularity University, Portugal, working together with Nova Business School of Economics in this initiative. I have the pleasure to be your host for today's webinar, an initiative that is part of the Role to Play campaign promoted by Nova SPE that aims to help our community to deal with the several challenges in the current context. Today, we have the presence of Sabine Simmer from Singularity University, Portugal. Sabine has a background in sensors and data. She is an entrepreneur, an athletic, and a researcher that has been working and studying the Generation Z since 2015, trying to understand and contextualize this new generation of workers. Who are they? What are their values? Their purpose? Are we ready for this new generation? 9 to 5 make us sick is the topic of this session, a reflection that will help us to understand this new paradigm of work and in a certain way that we are already working on. Before we start, some technical informations to our attendants. Please feel free to use the Q&A area present in the bottom of your screen to ask you questions that will be answered in the end of this session. The chat is mainly used for technical issues. And now, to learn more about the topic of this session, I leave you with Sabine.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. I'm Sabine Simmer. I'm currently in Austria, where I'm spending my COVID-19 time. I hope everybody is safe and well, and I want to welcome to join me for this session. I will be sharing my screen, so if you have any issues, please let us know in the chat. So when I say 9 to 5 makes us sick, literally, I do actually refer to COVID-19 in some instances, but I also do refer to the ability or the necessity to having to work 9 to 5 when we actually are talking about several issues, physical, mental, and also now, of course, COVID. So we're talking about a new paradigm for work, and there are a few issues that I want to tackle. Of course, we want to talk about how to humanize work for Gen Z. That's a population born after 1996 in the age of Greta. And of course, I'm referring here to Fridays for Future. And of course, Corona, the current COVID pandemic we have. Also, I will want to talk about how to connect work with purpose, which is a very important topic for Gen Z. And then look into brainstorming a new models, how we can do remote work, in particularly Gen Z, but then also all generations that are familiar with digital tools, but then also talk about a few different tools that are out there that needs to be evaluated properly. And there needs to be some type of etiquette to actually work together in this remote home office type scenario. So I want to point out that I've been in healthcare and data for the past 20 odd years. So really looking into what happens when we are inside, in front of a computer, in front of a PC, and or just inside in general, if we, are not exposed to vitamin D. That's a physical problem, back problems, heart failure, for example, or heart diseases, huge problem. Not really working in areas where you can stand up, huge problem. So this is like one aspect when we're talking about white collar, quote unquote, office type work. There is also the mental problem that we shall not underestimate at all, which basically has to do with the fact that we have burnouts, we have different other types of mental problems that are caused by really having to work in a situation where you can't get out, which is completely unflexible. And then, of course, now also looking into the situation that we currently have with COVID-19, where, again, is working in an office really something that we want to do or not? Or is the commute there too long? Does it make much more sense? Are we much more productive if we do work at home? Or is it even possible? Do we have anything from internet access that's high speed to the ability to work in a separate room and not being disturbed by kids. So there are lots of different layers, and this is now I'm focusing on, again, office. You can basically look at the same when you talk about different types of industries, manufacturing, industries where people have to work in very close proximity, and also doing a very static, in terms of physical activity, very static work. And so, again, what makes us sick is very important, an underlying tone within the context of remote work. The reason why I'm saying this, I want to leave you, or I want to tell you a little story, is that I have been basically remote working since there was the beginnings of the internet, so the early or mid 90s. But then in 2007, I got my first iPhone, and I'm also typical, like I'm a very, very dedicated snowboarder. So when I got my phone, 2007, I sent an email to a customer, went up to really look at the best powder run, the best line down the mountain I've had. We had 3 feet, that's about a meter of fresh snow. And I was standing on top of the mountain, and I sent another email, and the customer was happy. And I had the perfect powder run down the mountain. And this to me was, oh my God, smartphones, working remote, being able to access information on a screen. It really was, to me, eye-opening. And this was also something over the times I started implementing in pretty much any job, or any, even with students, but then also within my own organizations. So it was very important for me that we can create that flexibility. So now I just briefly want to say, who is Gen Z? So that you get a little bit of a background. It's 40% of the world population. So we have to be very well aware that in some areas, Nigeria, for example, India, and also China, you have the largest Gen Z populations. But even in the US, it's 65 million of a population versus very similar in Europe as well. They're highly fiscally conservative. So we have to be very careful, because they are shaped by 2008, the crisis, the financial crisis, and that's literally worldwide. And that's across different social and economic families. So it's not just one particular area they're focusing on. When they are fiscally conservative, it's across the board. They own, of course, the internet. They're called digital natives. We all know that, but it's very important also to understand that they communicate in different time zones, in different regions, with different, people with different social status. So there's a lot of mix and mash. So it's definitely not, the status quo is not something that that generation is used to. That's pretty stale. They're very entrepreneurial, so they like to get stuff done. They like peer-to-peer, which basically means because of the social media, because of the internet, they have the ability to actually look at somebody who has the same interest or the same problem in a completely different country with a completely different background. But because it's peer-to-peer, there is an ability to actually get it done pretty quickly. And so there's an entrepreneurial spirit. And of course, through that, the networking, if you just look at different tools that are out there and the way they're used, you have a lot of grouping, a lot of networking, and that's basically something that Gen Z is really, really good at. And they also synthesize. So they look at different projects at the same time, and they mix and match. And they're very, very keen on making sure that whatever they do, they can do across projects. So they're very efficient. So again, the misconception about Gen Z, a lot of people say it's a generation that's lazy. So that's a misconception right there. They're efficient, not lazy. And they're extremely confident, definitely not disrespectful. So we have to be very, very well aware if we want to employ that generation. to not interpret the way they act as lazy or disrespectful, but as efficient and confident. The other area that I really want to focus on is now Gen Z and work. So again, I said before, they're problem oriented, so they look up a solution on the internet. They don't really like to sit in school and on the bench, learn something by heart and then having to sort of go back and oh, I think I learned that somewhere. No, they're like, well, I got the internet, so I'm just looking things up right away. So we have to be very, very much aware that they are in that aspect also a very creative and a very or even tangible creative generation. So again, global, interdisciplinary. I said that also in the fact that they're networkers, so extremely global. And interdisciplinary in the way that they like to actually mix and match. So if you have been trained as one person, doesn't necessarily mean that's the job that you're going to do. It's really this mixing and matching of different disciplinaries. They like to have an impact. So Fridays for Future, I know it's a great metaphor for that, because what they want to achieve is to create a sustainable economy that makes an impact. So it's not only, environmental impact, but it's also around, gender equalities. It's around social equalities. It's about ethics. So really making sure that you create an opportunity for them so they can have an impact, give them power to actually have that impact. So they're going to be choosing these type of companies as well. And very importantly, they have that need to balance friends and family with their financing. So very interesting also is they like to spend quite a lot of time with their friends and family, and then balance that with, what type of job and how much do I need to spend and how flexible is that job, and so that I can spend more time with friends and family. So again, this is a survey by Skill Survey in the U.S. So it's very different in Europe. Not very, but it's definitely different in Europe. Particularly when you look at down at the bottom, global intercultural fluency. So because of Europe being so diverse in different cultures from the south to the north, this has a little bit of a different number. Very interesting, however, is the top number, and that is critical thinking, problem solving. So Gen Z thinks that more than a third that they're not ready for critical thinking or problem solving, but that's what they do. So it's also they have their own misconception about themselves because, they have not been able to fulfill that need of problem solving and that somewhat critical thinking. So this is a very interesting survey. If you have time, I put it in here. It's very interesting for you to have a look and be able to identify maybe the areas that you want to study more if you are an employer and are looking into the readiness they perceive. So again, as an employer, very important is now emotional intelligence. So it's really about, listen to that population, to that generation without any judgment. Very, very often, you look at credentials, you think that credentials are important, which school you went to, who you know, et cetera, but very, very important is that in this particular area, in this particular age group, it's not necessary. Mentorship also, there's a craving for mentorship, but mentorship also that's open, that's understanding, that is, again, not judgmental. So it's very, very important to allow that generation to go forward, to let them do their stuff, but then, of course, mentor them, but not like this. And hierarchy is definitely not important. So you will see a lot of new types of management styles, like guilds, for example. Those are very popular right now in Germany, in Berlin. Flat hierarchies, very, very interesting to play around with new models, how you can actually get into new management styles and into new ways to engage, in particular because now you cannot observe all the time physically because you have the necessity to trust people or trust your workforce to work remotely and get their work done and find their own tools and their own decision-making processes. So because of that, the infrastructure also is important, and that is unfortunately lagging in many ways. We have to think about labor laws, in particular when talk about freelance, or how are people protected in their flexibility. Now, if you have home office, what are the laws there? How are people protected? In particular, when you talk about insurances, people might not be one full time. In particular, that generation is not necessarily interested in having a job full time, but is interested in picking and choosing a few different ones. So what if they are not freelance, not full time? Where do they fit in? So we have not really seen models yet where you have an infrastructure, you have policy that enables that. Important also, they are looking for all their jobs on digital platforms. So it's like digital, you got to go digital platforms per se. There are lots of new startups that are coming out, particularly fostering that generation, looking into what that generation wants to do. And the other thing, extremely, extremely important, if you want to engage that generation, you got to do anything on mobile. So any tool that you offer for remote work, or even within your company to do scheduling, time management, expense reports, et cetera, video conferencing, it gotta be able to do it also in mobile. So highly important. So if you have huge spreadsheets that nobody really understands how to read in the first place, very importantly to break it down. So this again has a lot to do with using mobile as what we always consider as a baby face. So really, creating modules that are able to be read. So we need to humanize work. Just bottom line, that's not only for Gen Z, that's just for anybody in the workforce in general. But very importantly for that generation is clear scope, clear deadlines, project-based. So it's not about, we might want to get this done, or we might, no, it's about this is what we need to get done by that date. Very clear deadlines, and there is not a lot of let me stay in the office for a little bit longer, because again, there's a project and we're gonna get that project done and that's it. So it's not about I'm staying in the office just because I have to clock in and clock out. So again, remote, so the ability to do home office or work digital nomads have been doing this for many years now. But also highly flexible. So you have core times where you always meet, or you always on chat, or you always on a video conference. Highly flexible in terms of where and how you can actually get to this, because you have a mobile. So the only thing you really need is 4G or Wi-Fi. And importantly also is that you have maybe standing meetings. So, every day at 6 p.m. or 9 a.m. or whatever the schedule might be, you have a check-in. And that can be any time you need or any time of the day you need. So again, they are self-determined, very importantly, to align work and their private life balance. So they want to personalize that for themselves. So they're not, okay, you only can have lunch from 12 to 1. Maybe they don't want to have lunch. Maybe they want to go surf. Again, there are lots of different layers. It's going to be highly complex in the beginning because the current way that management and that, when you went to B school, you were taught to do it. That's the way you do it. And that's, you basically have a schedule and a timeline and an Excel spreadsheet, and every employee is another, column in an Excel spreadsheet. This is not how you have to think or can think when you think about Gen Z or highly skilled Gen Z in particular. So also very important, and unfortunately or fortunately, this is also something in my own practice. Whenever you speak, now, during these times, I work with, let's say, younger people. There's no talk about a tool. There's no talk about how do I do this? Which button do I have to press? Why is this not working? Can you hear me? So all these things, which is just a lot of white noise, it just doesn't exist because that generation has grown up with those type of tools. So it's very important that we have to acknowledge that it's very important for us to make the tools or use the tools to reduce meeting times, to be much more efficient in what we do. And again, those tools are important. So I had mentioned Greta before. So we need to make sure that the values that within the company, you basically have a purpose. You have a set of values that actually aligns. And that basically is part of the culture that you're creating. However, we have to be extremely careful about the fact that the internal communication and the external communication needs to be completely aligned. So I cannot be like the green, super cool, modern, innovative, fair company on the outside, and inside, on the inside, I have people work overtime and, et cetera, because again, there is the internet, there are social media tools, there is a mobile phone. So all that information that previously might have been within the company did not excel, did not go outside the company, it goes right away. It's out. So again, if you as a company don't stand to your values, if your management doesn't stand to your values, it will be communicated and will be called out. So why employ that generation? Again, they are a highly digital workforce. They are just really good at that stuff. They have ideas for new products for the future. They have ideas for new business models. Because they're so entrepreneurial, because they're so interdisciplinary, because they're so global, there are no borders. There are no borders for ideas. So again, they're extremely interesting if you give them the freedom to express, their ideas. And again, we have to be also thinking about the fact they are fiscally conservative. So they are not like the big spenders. They understand what it means to actually really lose their job or you lose their savings because, again, they had a crisis in 2008. This is also the first generation that now first had a financial crisis in 2008 and now, not even 12 years later, has a pandemic. So this is a generation that is definitely not pure in the sense of like having experienced any hardship. This is a generation that has grown up within two different, very, very, very big crises in the just a period of a little bit more than a decade. So again, we have to be very careful about that. That shapes a person highly. The other is if we employ Gen Z because of their interest in a lot of different ideas and interdisciplinary, and again, credentials are not important. We can elevate craftsmanship. We can close the gap between high-skilled labor and people that are basically, coming out of university maybe, and maybe there is too much, people are coming out from different types of disciplines and not enough from others, and there's a mix and match. And all of that, if we can actually make sure that we offer that population the ability to make certain crafts that are currently missing a lot of people, and that's of course also in technology, but you have it in mechanics and engineering, etc., etc. that we can close that gap and keep that and give them the chance to do that. So just quickly, I'm watching the time here. Okay, I'm almost done. You got new tools to manage that freedom and autonomy. I had referred to it before. Mobile phone, flexible work hours. So again, the etiquette for remote work. I had mentioned that. It's very important that we create an etiquette also that is part of the culture. So for example, you have 30-minute slots, but you only book 15 to 20 minutes so that you can actually go walk to use the bathroom and go back and then have another call. So never have it one, like people used to do it 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. You never got off your desk or you never had time. You got really irritated. Don't do that. It's 45 minutes out of an hour max. It's 15 or 20 minutes out of 30 minutes max. So that's what I'm talking about, etiquette. And also, raise your hand if you need to speak, or use an emoji. If you're not visible, again, those are all things that we need to learn. And they're already given. And I have a few different tools for remote work because I spoke a lot about tools. So this is basically from Graphic Mania. So Graphic Mama is a blog, and if you go to this particular link, then it will show you quite a few different tools. I added some here that I'm also using myself. So for team communication, we use Slack, heads down. I love it. You got Microsoft Tools, which a lot of my customers are using. Meetings and conferences, of course, everybody's using Zoom nowadays, but there's also Uber Conference, Whereby, and so forth, and Skype Business. For organizing projects, you have Trello, you have Evernote. For project management in general, Atlassian has a few different tools. If you're in technologies, you might use Jira, or you might use Confluence. So again, you have a lot of different tools within that company. And then content sharing, everybody knows Google Drive. There's also Dropbox, there's Box, there's of course Office. So there are lots of different tools that you can start using. And again, look into those. Make sure that they fit your company values. Make sure that they fit what you want to achieve. There are lots of others that are Gen Z specific as well, that population is using or that generation is using. So some of them, House Party and so forth are probably less applicable for business. And with that, I want to go back and say thank you and give the word to Carla.
Okay, Sabine, thank you so much for helping us to understand this Generation Z that we all deal in our days. We will now pass to the Q&A. The first question we have here. I really believe that this generation was born to challenge companies and the whole society to rethink our purpose, our way of work, and also to be disruptive in a positive way. But as they are so confident about themselves, aren't we missing some human skills, meaning communication and collaborative work?
Oh, I think that's also a misconception there. So they are definitely highly communicative amongst themselves. So it's because of the fact that they don't feel acknowledged, or they don't feel welcomed, or they feel like, oh, we're just treated like teenagers, right? But they're not regular teenagers that you might have had 10 or 20 years ago. Even myself as a teenager, I definitely was not as grown up, I would say, or really as driven by a certain purpose than this generation. So they are confident. Yes, that's definitely something you have to chew on, but they're not snobby. They're just confident.
It also has to do with the companies. Most of companies at least in Portugal, the age, it's very high. So when we have this Generation Z coming up, they start to shake everything, and sometimes we have some communication problems. Let's pass to the second question. How do we balance this new generation with companies' legacy? Do you think that companies are ready for this new generation of co-workers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's a very difficult question, but then also can be very easy. So one is as a startup or when you start from scratch, of course, you can implement anything that I say. I mean, it's a given, easy. If you have a legacy, meaning that if you are, and I call them now old school companies, right? You will definitely have quite a lot of challenges in terms of initially setting up a stage where your values align and your culture aligns. So that's one. But that's, let's say, those are soft skills or those are soft facts. The other facts, however, are the tools that are currently used and the way that what I referred to before, the clocking in and the clocking out, that will definitely need a lot of rethinking. The easiest, however, would then be thinking about different verticals or different parts of the organizations, so that you say, okay, whoever deals with more innovative is here. Whoever deals with more a certain construction, of a certain product or so is this. So that you start implementing it on a smaller scale within a legacy or an old school company. But it is definitely something that we need to understand better in order to be able to scale that.
Okay, last question. In this campaign, the Role to Play campaign, we have been talking also about corporate culture and how companies with strong cultures were better prepared for disruption and also with this change in the new comings. Can this Generation Z be part of this change?
You mean the change of culture within organizations? Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And I think we need to give that generation a voice. We need to integrate that population, that generation, absolutely, in all decision-making processes. Because what has happened is we have to understand, like, this is a generation that has never been without the internet. Never. Even in the mom's womb, when they were a baby, not even born yet, they basically had access to the internet. So there isn't that, oh, I have to phone somebody, or it's gonna take me 3 days to get, or I need a fax machine, like you had said earlier. That doesn't work. The other, like I said before, it's a generation that has experience now, and particularly if you're like 18 now, or if you're 20, you already have experienced, 12 years ago when you were 6, the financial crisis in 2008, and it lingered on in Europe for many years. So you suddenly are an expert. You have an experience that you didn't have, Carla. I didn't have either. So there wasn't, but there wasn't really a big, global economic crisis that hit so many different areas. In some instances, in some countries, different than in others. But in general, you heard it on the news all the time, and the news being your mobile phone. So, this generation is exposed to everything at all times. So also, we see it in the news now, unfortunately what's going on in the US, you see that too, is you see immediate, So yes, we need to integrate them.
Okay, one more question. Uli has done a question. What then Generation Z wants, it's quite reasonable. In the meanwhile, it's necessary. Things for everyone in workforce. So how can we teach the rest those skills? How can we especially teach to today's leaders that?
That's again. I think one is just really educating about the way we perceive, sort of the elder generation perceives working with the Gen Z. The other is having really educates, like having really that population parts or representatives of that population also work with us. do different workshops where you can start really looking into how can I scale certain models for certain verticals. So very tangible. Again, okay, I have a vertical that is construction. I have a vertical that is, IT, XY, data science. I have another one that is, how do I actually deal now within the restaurants, or, again, verticals. And then figuring out, where the strengths are to actually deal with them. I don't think we can do it across the board. I don't think we can do it in like really old school companies. That would be a lost cause. But definitely in companies that are particularly dealing with products that population will then need and buy.
Okay, so I think thank you so much, Sabine, for all this information. I think for sure in the future we will talk more about this Generation Z, because there are lots of things that we are all learning about it. Thank you once more, Sabine. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is part of the Road to Play campaign promoted by NovSPE. At their website, you can find all the videos of the previous webinars at roadtoplay.novspe.pt. The webinars will come back next Thursday. Tomorrow we won't have a webinar. Next Thursday at 6 p.m. we will have Carla Rocha and Sonia Nunes talking about which story do you want to tell. Thank you so much. Bye, Sabine.
Bye. Bye, everybody.